So our song is mixed and we want to share it with the world. What do we need to do to be able to send this song to a friend? Well, we need to turn our attention to the master track. As we talked about when setting levels, this is the track that all the other tracks flow through before going to your speakers or headphones. As you may have noticed if you switched between Reaper and another audio playback application like iTunes or Spotify, that your song in Reaper wasn't as loud as the commercial recordings you were listening to in iTunes or Spotify. But you paid attention to make sure your levels were good, so why is your song so quiet? Well, that's because there's one step between mixing and distributing your music, and that's called mastering. If you're planning on having a professional mastering engineer master your songs for CD or digital distribution, stop right now. You'll want to send your final mix to the mastering engineer without any of the additional processing I'm about to show you. This gives your mastering engineer more options to do his or her job. But in case you don't have the budget to pay for a professional mastering engineer, I'm going to show you a quick way to master your own song yourself in Reaper. Regardless of your final plans, I encourage you to follow along with this quick mastering lesson. It will help you have a better understanding of what to expect out of mastering and what's involved in the process. We're going to use 4 different tools to tweak the overall level and tone of our mix: a compressor, an EQ, a multiband compressor, and a limiter. You don't necessarily need to use all of these tools to master your song. In fact, if you're unsure if a particular plugin is helping or not, it's best to leave it out of the chain. Now I'm going to start with the compressor. We used a compressor to make our vocals stand out in our mix. A compressor worked by evening out the difference between the louder and quieter parts of the vocal, and this allowed us to raise the level of the vocal without clipping. Well, we can also use a compressor on our entire mix, letting us increase the overall level and avoid clipping. To add a compressor to the master track, click on the Master Track's FX button. This works just like it does on any other track in Reaper. Now I'm going to use Recomp, so I'll add that to the master track. I'm going to use the Add Weight preset. It's very subtle and suited to putting on an entire mix. I'm going to go to the loudest part of the song, just at the solo here, and we're going to take a listen. Now I'll turn it off. Turn it on right now. Come what may. So now we brought up the overall level just a little bit, and there's still more we can do. Next, I'm going to add an EQ to the master track. Just click right here, hit Add. I'm going to use Re-EQ. Just like we put a high-pass filter or low-cut filter on the acoustic guitar to clean up the bass, I'm going to put a high-pass filter on the mix for the same reason. This time I'm going to set the frequency much lower. I'm going to set it to 40 Hertz. Getting rid of those extremely low frequencies will actually help the sound of the low end of our mix. But to be sure, we're leaving all the usable bass in the mix. Next, I'm going to add a small dip in the upper bass around 350 Hertz. I'm going to use this band number 3 for that. Go to 350. And I'm going to pull this down just 1 dB. Doing this will actually accentuate the lower bass and get rid of the boxiness in the upper bass. Next, I'm going to add 1 dB in the mids. I'm going to use band 4 for this and switch it to a band filter. I'm going to do this at about 3.5 kilohertz, which is 3,500 Hertz. I'm just adding 1 dB. This will add just a little extra clarity on the vocal and the acoustic guitar. Finally, I'm going to add just a little tiny bass boost at 100 Hertz to give the low end a little bit more weight. Let's go back to band number 2, and I'm going to add 2 dB. Because I am adding 2 decibels here and a decibel here, I'm actually going to lower my master gain by 1 dB just to compensate for that, just to make sure we don't clip. Now let's take a listen to that same section of the song with the EQ off, and then we'll listen to it on. Turn it on now. Now this is optional, so if you don't feel like you need it, it's just better not to add the EQ. And the changes I'm making are very subtle. Likely the most noticeable thing you would have heard is the slight boost in the upper mids. And this will make the track sound a little louder overall because we're more sensitive to those frequencies. Next, I'm going to add a more advanced tool called a multiband compressor. This one's called REAPER. This is sort of like a compressor and EQ in one. Like an EQ, we can adjust the level of different frequencies, but it gets more advanced because for each of those bands, we have the controls of a compressor. So why use a multiband compressor? Well, let's say we've got something where the bass frequencies keep jumping out, but the rest of the mix sounds really good. Well, by using a multiband compressor, we can control the loudness of the bass frequencies without affecting the higher frequencies in the voice, for example. Now I'm going to use the preset Audio Hacker Master Sweetener. Now you can try going through the other presets, but just like everything else, there are no presets that are going to be perfect, but they all offer a different starting place. Choose the one that sounds best on your mix. If you don't like them, chances are you don't need it. And like the EQ, if you feel you don't need it, just leave it off. But let's take a quick listen to this now. This is with it on and off.
Come what may, this
Turn it on.
pain will pass away. Our paths will cross.
Again, these changes are subtle, but they'll make quite a difference to your mix in the end. Finally, the last thing we're going to add is a master limiter. I'm just going to find that by typing master in here. There it is. On the master limiter plugin in Reaper, we have many of the same controls as a compressor. Now, I'm going to use the Audio Hacker Final Master preset to get started. With this preset, I'm only going to use the threshold control, and lowering the threshold in this limiter will increase the overall loudness. How much you lower it will really depend on the level of your song before it gets to the limiter. We can see the input level on the left-hand meter and the output level on the right-hand meter. I'm going to go to the loudest part of the song again and lower the threshold as far as I can before I start to hear distortion.
Come what may, this pain will pass away. Our paths will cross again someday. The same old way.
I'm pretty happy with it there around -6. When I went further down to the left, say around -10 or 11, I started to hear some effects of the limiter working that I didn't want to hear, and that's what I mean by distortion. If you followed all the steps about setting levels throughout this course, you should be able to bring the threshold down somewhere between 2 and 8 decibels, depending on your song. And you really have to use your ears for this to determine what sounds best. If you're not feeling confident about doing this process I've just shown you, and you aren't planning on hiring a professional mastering engineer, there are a number of low-cost online mastering tools. You can do an internet search to find some options. You may want to try out one of these online mastering services in addition to attempting your own master, and compare their result to yours and see what you prefer. Just remember to send the mastering service your original final mix without any processing or plugins on the master track. Now to wrap up, let's take a listen to what we did. I'm going to close this window. We're going to listen to the loudest part of the song here, starting at the solo. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn off the effects on our master track. Now let's take a listen again. Now I'm going to turn them on.
Pain will pass away. Our paths will cross
And off.
again someday. The same old
Back on.
way.
So even though we may not have heard a huge difference with each individual effect, turning them on and off, the cumulative effect of all of those plugins really makes a difference to the level of our mix. Now that you know a little bit more about mastering, it's time to talk about exporting.